This weekend, Pixar's latest original film, Luca, premieres on Disney+. So today, I'm doing a Pixar tier ranking. This is only the second tier ranking I've ever done, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your tier ranking of the Pixar films. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One more thing before we get started, this video is brought to you by Harry's. I like to kick off each summer with a nice clean shave. This year I wanted to treat my face right with personal care products from Harry's.com. Harry's is a personal care brand that delivers a close, comfortable shave at a fair price as low as $2 per blade refill. All right, time to find out what I look like under the beard. The combination of their high quality razors from their own factory in Germany with their rich texture foaming shave gels gives me a close, clean shave while keeping my skin happy. You can buy Harry's with or without a subscription. Razor refills are delivered directly to your door. And Harry's isn't just great for your face, they also give back. Harry's gives 1% of their global sales to nonprofit organizations that provide mental health care for those in need. Ta-da! Get your trial set for just $3 at harrys.com/Sean Chandler. In your trial set, you'll get a 5-blade razor, weighted handle, a blade cover, and their foaming shave gel. It's an incredible deal, but act fast while supplies last. The link is down below in the description, and let's get started. We're gonna go through these in release order, so we're starting with Toy Story. No reason to beat around the bush on this one. The original computer animated film is still one of the best of all time, so it goes right in the top category. Pixar just cracked the code on how to tell stories that children can engage with and understand, but that have deep themes that connect with adults on a personal level.
You did it! Congratulations!
And in particular with the Toy Story franchise, they just touched on this sense of nostalgia. But at its core, it's a story about Woody and his insecurities and learning to kind of overcome them through this newfound friendship. Woody needs to work through his jealousy. Buzz needs to work through this ontological crisis of realizing he's not actually from space, but all of it, despite being so fantastical, is so human. Other Pixar films, as well as other animated films from other studios, have gone bigger, more ambitious. They've had better technology, but few have been better than the original Toy Story, so easily it goes in the best category. Moving right along to the second Pixar film, we have A Bug's Life. Of the older Pixar films, this is probably the one I've easily watched the fewest times and that made the smallest impact on me. Don't get me wrong, I think there's some nicely done things in the plot, in particular using misunderstandings to build the conflict and the tension rather than just purely the villain. I think that the idea of using Aesop's fables to develop the story was a nice little touch. But of all the Pixar films, I think that this is the one that has aged the worst.
Well, that's your opinion.
A bunch of the graphics look like PlayStation 2 cutscenes. They simply didn't have the ability at that time to render this type of setting with enough detail. And so I just don't think it looks very good. And just in general, a bit intense at times, especially for a G-rated film, but still a movie that has a lot of solid Pixar humor that stands out, that's very inventive. So a movie that, not one of my favorites, but still good, so we'll put it in the good category. Next up, Toy Story 2. This is a movie that manages to still capture all the emotion, the humor, nostalgia of the first film while changing up the group dynamics and putting them in all new scenarios. This time, Woody is off with the store. He needs to be rescued, so Buzz mounts a rescue.
Because that's what heroes do.
In the process of all of this, it just does a nice job of taking this theme of childhood nostalgia that's all throughout this franchise and building on it, this idea of how as you grow older, life changes, people move on and how do you process that? And in particular, does some amazing storytelling as you get Jesse's backstory. It doesn't need to say a word, and it tells you so much while pulling out so many big emotions. Along the same lines, there's a bunch of just great references to other things, especially the Star Wars stuff that they do. It ends with a very funny bloopers segment. But actually for me, I think this is my least favorite of the Toy Story movies, which is saying a lot, but I still think it's a great movie. We're putting this one in the great category. Next up, Monsters, Inc., a fun and creative spin on every child's worst nightmare. The monsters under the bed. Only the monsters aren't out to harm children. They just work for the electrical company and need to get power for their city. At the core of this one is one of the absolute best duos in all the Pixar canon. Our two leads here just have so much chemistry. Their banter is so good and the performances just absolutely pop. Adding to that, Boo is just so adorable. And really at its core, this is what Pixar does so well. They take this familiar concept and then they just do something so different from it. And when populated with these charming characters and memorable lines, once again, this is one of the best. Speaking of the best, we've got Finding Nemo. This is actually my personal favorite Pixar film, so naturally it's gonna go in the best category. This is a movie that I didn't see until 10 years after it came out, and perhaps that shapes a lot of my perspective about the film, but I first watched it as a first-time father with a 1-year-old, and this movie at its core is kind of a movie about parenting. So I watched it for the first time at a phase of life where it just resonated with me on such a deep level with this concept of letting go at its core. Once again, you've got these memorable characters, memorable, iconic, quotable lines, and it's just a series of great sequences that put a big grin on your face, all building up to this big emotional payoff. And it's a movie that's not afraid to be tragic right out of the gate. It has so many big emotions, touches on so much of the emotional spectrum. That's why this is one of my personal favorites. Continuing their hot streak, that brings us to The Incredibles, a movie that manages to blend the superhero genre, the spy genre, while being a story about a man's midlife crisis, and it does all of it really well. On the superhero vibe, it creates this original world of superheroes and set of characters with interesting powers and dynamics between them, the government, the city, the people, has this whole fleshed out backstory that it's able to tell so efficiently. And then it's all packaged with like this 60s retro spy vibe that ties into the look of the technology, the score for the film. All of it just has this very cool vibe to it. And all of it is told with Brad Bird's usual dynamic directorial style. But the heart of the film is the story about a family. So it's got awesome action, amazing world building, great characters, amazing style, and so much heart at the core of it. Once again, this is one of the best. Next up, Cars, a charming story about a big city racer who gets stuck in an old-fashioned, breezy town populated by a bunch of quirky characters. It has some nice themes about humility, as well as kind of small town America that's kind of gotten stuck in the past, and realizing that that doesn't mean that they don't still have their charms at the same time. Just has a nice sense of American nostalgia, and the race sequences are nice and dynamic. I think it hurt itself a little bit by making Lightning McQueen so insufferable in the first half of the film. I know he has to learn humility, but he is really difficult to like in the first half, and it does slow down and drags a bit in the middle. Still a solid Pixar film. For me, I would just put this one in the very good category. Some of you grew up on this one. I know this one is one that kids absolutely love. it came out when I was like 25, so I don't quite have that much personal nostalgia for the film itself. Moving right along, we got Ratatouille. Now, this is a bizarre concept for a movie. It's a story about a rat with daddy issues who was trained to cook by a ghost who remote controls a man by pulling his hair.
Wow, that was weird.
Interesting concept, and somehow Brad Bird is able to turn it into this personal story filled with emotion. That's what Pixar does so well, is take these bizarre concepts and make them so human. This one also is filled with a bunch of dynamic Brad Bird action sequences. Even though they're not really action sequences, it still has his style jam-packed into them. Now, as much as I'm amazed at what Brad Bird was able to do with this film, it's not one that I personally tend to put on all that often, but still, I'm gonna put this one in the very good category. Then we have WALLE, one of the most ambitious and unique Pixar films, and that's saying quite a bit. The first half of the movie is basically a silent film, but it still manages to be endearing, charming, and heartfelt almost exclusively because how good they designed WALL-E, where this robot is still able to emote and be cute. The second half of the film then gives us this massive curveball, takes us into space, and suddenly it's this quick-moving adventure that has a message and is trying to say something. And what's really impressive is that these two halves manage to fit together. So you have cute robot, we have a bit of romance, we have a message, we have a big adventure, a heroic sacrifice. This movie is so weird and different, but somehow it comes together and works. Maybe not the most accessible of Pixar films, but this one easily goes in the great category. That'll bring us to the 10th Pixar film, Up. The first 10 minutes of this film is just a masterclass in visual storytelling where you see this couple's story of life and love. You see their regrets, their wants, the tragedies, the victories, all of it. You understand their relationship, and it does all of this without needing to say a word. The only way to describe it is excellent. Now, for me, the rest of the movie doesn't quite match that top tier of storytelling, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still amazing. It's still great, populated with cute, fun characters, tons of emotion, amazing visuals and adventure. So for me, this one goes in the great category, not quite top tier for me. That will bring us to Toy Story 3, and once again, Pixar defies the odds and gives us another sequel just as good as the original. I'm gonna put Toy Story 3 in that best category. There's several reasons for this. Right off the bat, with Lotso, we get the most diabolical of the villains in the Toy Story franchise. In fact, this movie does such a good job of building the tension, the conflict, and making you feel the danger that there's a sequence in this movie where I actually believed when I first thought it that they were going to kill off Buzz, Woody, and the rest of the toys. But I think a big part of what makes this movie work so well is that it came out 15 years after the original, so that audience that watched the original in the theater had grown up with Andy. And so it just made this story just feel like the perfect bookend to the Andy trilogy with such a satisfying conclusion on a story and emotional level. Without question, it goes in that best category. Speaking of the best, our next movie is not one of the best. It's the worst. Cars 2. For me, this is easily the biggest misfire of all the Pixar films. It feels like a direct-to-video spin-off, except it's not as good as the actual Cars spin-offs. Here I am. Now, the visuals here are fantastic, as always. Everything else, not so much. I mean, the basic plot line is bizarre. The original was like a racing sports movie, and this is a spy movie that takes the plucky side character from the first one and pushes him to the forefront. So now we're focusing in on Mater while he's doing spy stuff. It just doesn't make sense in light of the original film. It feels lowbrow. The humor feels cheaper than ever before. So for me, this just does not seem up to Pixar's normal standards of what they try to do. It doesn't have any of the emotion. It's not heartfelt. It just doesn't touch on anything that I think of when I think of great Pixar. Without question, this one goes in the bad category. Apparently, Cars 2 left Pixar with a couple flat tires because next up is Brave, and this is another movie that I'm going to put in that bottom category. Now, I would say Cars 2 is bad. I would say that Brave is more mediocre and kind of a misfire. The first third of the movie kind of sets up this expectation about the world that we're going to be in and the dynamic between this mother and this daughter. And then whenever the swap happens in it, the dynamic changes, the humor changes, and I just don't think the pieces fit together. The movie actually feels like a lesser studio trying to copy Disney, but just not as good either. It touches on the right ideas, but it doesn't fully come together by the end, and I find this movie pretty unbearable.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Okay, that was probably an exaggeration, but it's a mediocre film. Not fully embarrassing, not very good either. Next up, Monsters University, a pleasant enough but safe addition to the Pixar filmography. Now, if this had been released as a direct-to-video sequel prequel, I'd probably be praising it as one of the best direct-to-video sequel spinoffs of all time. But as a theatrically released Pixar film, it just feels kind of lightweight. It's a lot of fun, the characters are charming, but it does kind of play very heavily into the Revenge of the Nerds template directly. It's a formulaic, familiar film, but it hits all the right notes. For me, this is a solid, good Pixar film. Next up is Inside Out. Now, the basic plot line here about two opposites that get lost and have to make their way back to the group has been thoroughly explored in other Pixar films, but somehow they take this familiar story structure and tell one of the most unique stories I've ever seen told in a family film, and it manages to be one of the most emotion-filled Pixar films.
Oh, okay. I see what you did there.
It has all the fun and hijinks you expect from a Pixar film, but it also manages to visualize what goes on inside of our heads. Once again, that's what Pixar does so well, is making these accessible stories that are unique and different and explore big, gigantic ideas, and my children can enjoy it and I can enjoy it while exploring our emotions. Quite literally in the case of this film, this one goes in the great category. That will bring us to The Good Dinosaur, a decent enough piece of family entertainment that has some gorgeous photorealistic backgrounds, but much like the movie Brave, just kind of feels off-brand for Pixar, and it doesn't land quite right. When it comes to the plot line, the idea of, once again, the odd pairing, people on a journey, sort of thing that Pixar gravitates towards an awful lot, and it just feels like something that other studios would do, because other studios have told stories like this before. And speaking of the visuals and the dinosaurs, the mix of these photorealistic backgrounds with these highly cartoonish dinosaurs, it just didn't look right to me. The two styles didn't mesh quite right. And that's in general how I feel about this movie. It just never fully comes together and meshes properly. So for me, this goes in that bottom category. Like Brave, I wouldn't say it's bad, just very mediocre and a misfire. Swimming right along, we've got Finding Dory, another charming adventure in the sea that probably hits a few too many familiar beats along the way. Now, when this movie is focused in on Dory and her relationship with her parents, it touches on some deep emotions and made me feel an awful lot, maybe almost brought a tear to my eye. But when we get into the actual main adventure of the story, it just felt like we were hitting too many beats that felt too much like the original, had a bit of a rehash vibe to it. While it didn't make any big, gigantic missteps, still had a bunch of humor that landed. But if I'm in the mood to swim with the fishes, I'm pretty much always going to choose Finding Nemo over Finding Dory. So this is one, I just got to put it in that good category. Then we'll pull up to Cars 3. In general, a nice return to form for the franchise, putting the focus back on Lightning McQueen and the racing genre. The basic plotline borrows pretty heavily from Rocky 3 and Talladega Nights, so while it's not the most original plotline, it does mesh well with this franchise and serves the Lightning McQueen character well, delivers the payoff that you want in a way that closes out the trilogy nicely. Where this one loses me a little bit is that the big plot twist reveal for me was just telegraphed as soon as the Cruise character was introduced. And while I don't mind the plot twist itself, having it take place in the middle of the race, I just feel like it undermines the credibility of the story. I understand we're watching a movie about talking cars, but you have to have some logic, consistency in the way that your universe works. And so for me, it kind of feels like this movie solid until the last lap where it gets a bit of a flat tire.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Still a decent enough film, so I will put this one in the good category. Then we have Coco, a delightful story about death and the afterlife, exploring ideas about family responsibility, regret, and finding your true passion, all while showing this real love for music. For me, I've always thought this movie was very good, but not one of the top tier Pixar films. Now, this is a movie with a very passionate and loyal fan base that love to tell me how much more you like this movie than I do. And my wife agrees with you. This is her favorite Pixar film. It just never fully resonated with me as much as it does with a lot of you. Some of the ideas about family responsibility and stuff, it just didn't connect with me as much as many of you it did. Likewise, I felt the big twist reveal was telegraphed a little bit in advance. So a very good movie, not one of my favorite Pixar films. Then we have Incredibles 2. For me, this was a great follow-up to the original film that continued the themes, the character arcs, and the journey of the characters into this new adventure, all with Brad Bird's dynamic action and continuing the fantastic world building of the original. Another thing I dug about this one, I liked Screenslaver as a villain more than I liked Syndrome as a villain. Whereas Syndrome, I felt leaned too much into a villain trope I'm not all that interested in. I thought Screenslaver had a better developed backstory and more unique journey. It's not as good of a film as the original one, but to me, it is a great follow-up and the sequel that I wanted. That'll bring us to Toy Story 4. Now, this is a movie that I very publicly said was a very bad idea and totally unnecessary. And then in the first 10 minutes, I got, wait a minute, Toy Story 3 closed out the Andy storyline so well, but what would happen to Woody and the group when they're with someone different? And his dynamic to the owner changed, therefore his dynamic to the group changed, and it won me over so well. And I thought that was such a clever exploration of how, as we grow up, our dynamics to the people with the people around us change, and that's what happens in this story. Also, along the way, they give us a villain. It's not really a villain after all. She does villainous things, but they make her multi-dimensional and found another fantastic way to close out the Toy Story franchise as well as Woody's journey. So I absolutely loved it. I would put this one in the best category. Real quick, before I give you the final three, remember to join me down below in the comments section. Share your tier ranking of the Pixar films and let me know what other franchises should I do a tier ranking for. Also, remember, if you want to get that starter kit for Harry's, it's just $3 at the link down below in the description. As we approach the end, we have Onward, a fun road trip movie that manages to work in fantastical elements, mythical creatures, and even like a touch of Indiana Jones in the mix, all while telling a story about two brothers and their relationship with their father. It touches on some really big emotions, as you'd expect from any Pixar film, and you have a great fun voice cast with Tom Holland and Chris Pratt as the two brothers. For me, though, the actual storytelling mechanics of it all kind of undermined the movie a little bit, and it just kind of felt like they didn't pay attention to some of the, like, just the practical elements of how the story would play out, and it distracted me from the story in a way that I wasn't really expecting. So while it's a nice, easy to watch adventure, I think it made some weird mistakes. So for me, I can only put this one in the good category. It's frustrating because this one was like so close to being great, but it just made some weird mistakes. So I can only put this one in the good category. Our next to last film on here is Soul, another big, ambitious, wild idea for a Pixar movie that kind of gives the inside-out treatment except for the afterlife, but also does like a body swap element in the middle of it. Thought this was a bit one of the most inconsistent Pixar films because certain elements to it, the humor I thought could be really funny, the exploration of life, the hopefulness, all really cool stuff. I think I like the real world segments quite a bit more than the afterlife segments. In the real world, I thought it was funny. The humor landed. In the afterlife stuff, it's trying to do the inside out treatment with the afterlife, and I just don't think it worked. I didn't think it was as insightful. Likewise, the main plot line about two opposites getting lost together, having to get back to the group. We've been there before. To me, it worked better as a celebration of life rather than an exploration of the afterlife. I'm still going to put this one in the great category. It swung for the fences. It didn't quite get there, but I think it did a great job at what it was going for with some missteps in there. And finally, we have Luca, the latest Pixar film. And this is just a delightful coming-of-age story about two friends that happen to be sea monsters that head into a small town village to explore all the fun things about humanity. It explores friendship, parent expectations, trying to be your true self and not hiding who you are. But for me, it felt a little bit straightforward and simple for a Pixar film. All of it's good, all of it's charming, all of it's stuff that I liked, but it didn't necessarily hit those emotional highs that so many Pixar films hit. It's not the funniest Pixar film. It's not the most inventive, the most ambitious. It's just a solid Pixar film. Doesn't make any big mistakes. I didn't think it took any big chances either. So for me, this one distinctly goes in the good category. I really don't have any big complaints about it, but there just wasn't anything that really stood out about this particular film other than to say it was charming and delightful, so it goes in that good category. So there you have it. There's my full ranking of the Pixar films in tier fashion. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it, you can find my top animation rankings right over there. If you want to get a clean shave at an affordable price, you can get that starter kit from Harry's for just $3 at that link down below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.